Chapter 4: The Growth of Medieval Towns. In the ancient world, town life was well established, particularly in Greece and Rome. Ancient towns were busy trading centers, but after the fall of the Roman Empire in the West, trade with the East suffered and town life declined. In the early Middle Ages, most people in Western Europe lived in scattered communities in the countryside. By the High Middle Ages, towns were growing again. One reason for their growth was improvements in agriculture. Farmers were clearing forests and adopting better farming methods. As a result, they had a surplus of crops to sell in town markets. Another reason was the revival of trade. Seaport towns like Venice and Genoa in Italy served as trading centers with the East. Within Europe, goods often traveled by river, and many towns grew up near these waterways. Many of the merchants who sold their wares in towns became permanent residents. So did people practicing various trades. Some towns grew wealthier because local people specialized in making specific types of goods. For example, towns in Flanders, present day Belgium and the Netherlands, were known for their fine woolen cloth. The Italian city of Venice was known for making glass. Other towns built their wealth on the banking industry that grew up to help people trade more easily. At the beginning of the Middle Ages, towns were generally part of the domain of a feudal lord, whether a monarch, a noble, or a high ranking church official. As towns grew wealthier, town dwellers began to resent the lord's feudal rights and his demand for taxes. They felt they no longer needed the lord's protection or his interference. In some places, such as northern France and Italy, violence broke out as towns struggled to become independent. In other places, such as England and parts of France, the change was more peaceful. Many towns became independent by purchasing a royal charter. The charter granted them the right to govern themselves, make laws, and raise taxes. Free towns were often governed by a mayor and a town council. Power gradually shifted from feudal lords to the rising class of merchants and craftspeople. Guilds. Medieval towns began as centers for trade, but they soon became places where many goods were made. Both trade and the production of goods were overseen by organizations called guilds. There were two main kinds of guilds: merchant guilds and craft guilds. All types of craftspeople had their own guilds, from cloth making to cobblers, who made shoes, belts, and other leather goods, to the stonemasons who built the great cathedrals. Guilds provided help and protection for the people doing a certain kind of work, and they maintained high standards. Guilds controlled the hour of work and set fair prices. They also dealt with complaints from the public. If, for example, a coal merchant cheated a customer, all coal merchants might look bad. The guilds therefore punished members who cheated. Guild members paid dues to their guild. Their dues paid for the construction of guild halls and for guild fairs and festivals. Guilds also used the money to take care of members and their families who were sick and unable to work. It was not easy to become a member of a guild. Starting around the age of 12, a boy and sometimes a girl became an apprentice. An apprentice's parents signed an agreement with a master of the trade. The master agreed to house, feed, and train the apprentice. Sometimes, but not always, the parents paid the master a sum of money. Apprentices rarely got paid for their work. At the end of 7 years, apprentices had to prove to the guild that they had mastered their trade. To do this, an apprentice produced a piece of work called a masterpiece. If the guild approved of the work, the apprentice was given the right to set up his or her own business. Setting up a business was expensive, however, and few people could afford to do it right away. Often they became journeymen instead. The word journeyman does not refer to a journey. It comes from the French word journée for day. A journeyman was a craftsperson who found work by the day instead of becoming a master who employed other workers.